Hi, welcome to this webinar, 20 Rules to Help You Successfully Complete Your PhD. My name's Dr. Mel. I run Write That PhD on Facebook and Twitter and am the Education Manager for the Digital Health CRC. It is my great pleasure to welcome our presenter today, Professor Niamh Brennan from University College, Dublin. Niamh recently published a paper called 100 PhD Rules of the Game to Successfully Complete a Doctoral Dissertation. This journal article is what today's presentation is based upon. We're not going to be covering all 100 rules today, just a selection of 20. Niamh's first rule is a very important one. Enjoy your doctoral studies. I encourage you to go forth and enjoy the journey as well as the destination. The destination is exciting because you get to put doctor in front of your name, but I encourage you to enjoy the PhD journey because the skills you learn along the way and the experiences you have will serve you well for the rest of your life.
Because some days in your office, you can be experiencing quite a lot of pain. But overall, you need to feel that you're actually enjoying doing the research. And if you're a PhD student and you're finding it absolutely a struggle, that may be a signal to you that maybe being a researcher isn't the career for you. But if you enjoy something, it's much more likely that you'll be successful at it. So that's my first rule, Mel. My next rule is open your mind, and learning in a PhD has a very particular way of going about it, and it involves developing a critical thinking. So, and a PhD starts out with your supervisor advising you, but that advice often comes in the form of criticism. And my advice to everybody is don't be defensive when your supervisor criticizes you. It could be a lot worse that you get no criticism at all, and you're not going to learn much in that circumstance. So don't be defensive if you receive criticism. Open your mind to what your supervisor is trying to tell you and learn from the criticism. And be grateful to have a supervisor that does criticize, because it's a fantastic way to improve. My next rule is to develop your critical thinking skills. So it starts with the supervisor criticizing your work. But at the end of a PhD, you should be fully trained as a researcher, and that means that you are able to exercise your own critical thinking skills. So good academics are constantly engaging in critical thinking, criticizing their own research, criticizing other people's research, and by criticizing other people's research, that's where you find opportunities to make a contribution to the prior literature. Also, academics are part of this double-blind refereeing process, and part of being a referee is being critical, constructively critical of other people's work. So learning to be critical is a fundamental part of doctoral studies. The next rule is have confidence. Thousands of people before you have done a PhD. If they can do it, surely you can do it. So it's quite daunting. At the same time, please have the confidence in your ability to complete your dissertation. And I have another related rule, which is don't magnify the requirement for a contribution to unrealistic proportions. So be confident that you can complete your doctorate studies successfully, because thousands of other people have done it before you, and you are just as good as them. Now, coming up in the next rule is a picture of Niamh, myself. And this is how I visualize myself. There I am, a dog with a bone. I am absolutely determined, I am absolutely dogged, and I am completely persistent. And my advice to you is to try and acquire the grit credential of determination, doggedness, and persistence. In my opinion, these characteristics are far more important in completing a PhD than IQ. Determination and doggedness, much more important than IQ. I'm going to now, in the next rule, show another picture of Niamh. Again, another way in which I visualize myself. So there I am, a bowling skittle in the bowling alley. And no matter how many times somebody throws the ball down at me and knocks me down in the bowling alley, I will get up again. And again, the life of a researcher is full of knockdowns, specifically your paper being rejected from a journal, and you have to bounce back again and keep at it until you get that paper published. And that's a disposition that I try and encourage my own students to learn. A related image is coming up, which is, it's an absolute roller coaster, the doctoral studies. And in fact, there is growing realization in universities that doctoral students suffer from mental health issues because it is such a roller coaster. So you are likely, as everybody does, to experience high moments occasionally and probably more often low moments. And all I can say to you is that you have to realize that this is a normal part of doctoral studies. So again, you're just going to have to manage the highs and lows. Right.
Hi, Niamh. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well done. Well, you've sped through those first 7 rules. I thought I might just come in and ask you a quick question, and also say hi to people who have joined us since I did the introduction. So hi everyone. We've got over 200 people online now. I'm Dr. Mel, Education Manager at Digital Health CRC. And the director of Write That PhD on Twitter and Facebook. So welcome everyone, really great to see so many keen beans online. Niamh's just gone through her first 7 rules, and I just thought I might like to, ask her a question. In my experience, you know, there's a lot of questions PhD students have along the journey. I was wondering, what is the most common question that you get? You've been supervising for a long time. How many years is it again?
Too many to yeah.
Okay, but you've supervised many doctoral candidates. What are the 1 or 2 things that keep reoccurring? I'm asking this because I think it's very validating for people that are on the journey to sort of know that they're not alone, and the things that they may be feeling and the questions that they've got are shared. They're not, they're not in isolation with these things. So I think it's really important that we talk about things that may be concerning us or holding us back. So what do students often ask you?
I kind of slightly express it differently, Mel. I could nearly say, what don't they ask me?
Okay, fabulous.
Because the area that I think is often overlooked by students, particularly maybe at the earlier part of their doctoral studies, they're so focused on actually doing the research that they don't pay enough attention to the writing part of it. So with my own students, except for the first meeting, they must send me written work before I meet with them. I'm not supervising the student, I am supervising the dissertation. And so I need to see it in writing. And the reason why I put so much emphasis with my students on writing is because writing forces you to become clearer. So if you have something rattling around in your head in a bit of a confusing way, when you sit down and try to write it, it forces you to become clearer in your thinking. And then if you share your written work with your supervisor, then they can further help you to become clearer on your thinking. So at the end of the day, a dissertation is a written product of, X hundred pages. So you have to clock up those pages. You've got to keep writing. And you've got to get better at writing. And the only way to get better at writing is to keep writing. So to me, that is the key area of difficulty, is writing, and writing well.
Yeah. So you see a lot of people getting to the end with nothing written, and that causes stress?
Well, I think that they leave the writing as a kind of afterthought.
Short, yeah.
Whereas I think that you need to write from day one.
Yeah.
And you need to write every day. I was very scared when I was doing my PhD. I'd heard of people who'd hit the wall, so to speak. And I was really scared that I would hit the wall. So what I did was I decided that if every day I could write a page or a half a page, I would eventually get to the 300 plus pages of my dissertation. So instead of worrying about the huge big project, I conceptualized it as tiny steps that would build up to getting to the finishing line in the end. And in doctoral studies, the tiny steps basically are writing a paragraph, writing a page every single day, if you can.
Great. All right. Well, now I'll turn off my microphone and let you get back onto the next rule.
Great. Thanks again, Mel. So my next rule, I suppose in a way, it related to my being scared that I wouldn't complete. And I realized that if I was going to complete, I had to stop doing things that I didn't really need to do. In other words, I had to focus on my PhD. And again, I have another image in my head of that, which is putting on my blinkers. So I have my blinkers on so that I don't look to the left-hand side, I don't look to the right-hand side. I look straight ahead, focusing on getting to that finishing line and not hitting the wall. So when I started, I exited a whole load of things that I was involved with, and I decluttered my activities. There were one or two things that were too good to give up, and I didn't give them up, but I did give up, we'll say, things like being treasurer of the tennis club, the local tennis club and stuff like that. I knew that I wasn't going to get it finished unless I absolutely focused on it. So focusing, I think, is really important. Related is that you have to be very disciplined. I mean, a doctoral dissertation is nothing more than a very large project. And what you need to bring to bear on it is excellent project management skills. Starting your project, planning it, executing, controlling, completing the research and the dissertation. And a proper plan has to have timelines, deadlines. So having that discipline with your plan, I think, is critical to managing what is a large project. As well as being disciplined, you have to be methodical. And again, it's not just a large project, but you're managing it over a lengthy period of time. So because it takes place over such a long period of time, you have to be methodical, keeping good records of what you're reading, of your research, etc. And I don't know about the people on this webinar, but speaking personally, I could not tell you the amount of time that I have wasted looking for that reference or looking for that article that I read a while ago and I never kept a note of it. Of course, nowadays you have things like EndNote and all the rest, data management systems, which make it a bit easier to keep track of your references and your reading. Another rule is, jumping on a little bit, is look for help. There are lots of people out there who can actually help you with your research. For example, other doctoral students, for example, other academics. And if you're having problems, don't hide it. Tell your supervisor. Maybe talk to the head of the doctoral program. Maybe talk to the head of research. It's okay to confess that, for example, you don't understand something, that your research is taking longer than you expected, or maybe even that you're having health problems or you're having personal problems. But if you don't look for help, and if you don't tell people, your problems may get worse. So help is out there, but at the end of the day, you have to look for it and you have to take the initiative to get help. Another, and this again I'd say is one of the most important rules, just jumping on a bit, is you have to take responsibility for your research. It's not your supervisor's responsibility, it's not anybody else's responsibility, it is only your responsibility. And I'll just give you a quote from a colleague of mine, which I think just contextualizes this very well. And he's talking about doctoral studies, and he says the lecturer takes on the servant role rather than the sage on the stage role, with the student in effect having responsibility for setting a unique, just for you curriculum, defining their own research agenda and their own journey of inquiry. So the student is the lead, not the supervisor. And because the student is the lead researcher, the student is responsible. And if you have a problem, we'll say, and this unfortunately happens luckily in a minority of cases, but say you have a problem in relation to supervision, that's not the supervisor's problem, that's actually your problem. And that's a problem that you're going to have to fix yourself, possibly with the help of other academics, such as the head of the doctoral program or whatever. And this sense that your research is your own responsibility has to continue with you over your career. So if I get a paper rejected from a journal, I don't blame the journal, I don't blame the reviewers, I blame myself. It's my responsibility. I did not land the paper properly with the reviewers, and that is my responsibility. And then it's my responsibility to fix the problems. So again, jumping on to rule number 18, learn from others. And this is possibly a little bit related to looking for help. But thousands, hundreds of thousands of people have been before you doing doctoral studies and doing research. You don't have to make it up. Other people have done this before you. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Other people have conducted a literature review. You have to conduct a literature review. Look at how other people conduct their literature review and learn by looking at other people's literature reviews. Look at how other people have done their research to learn how to design your own research, etc. So watch and learn from the experts in your discipline. I've touched on the next rule again because I was so scared of it, the importance of finishing. And that was a burning driver in my head that I had to finish it. In fact, when I did finish my PhD and people would say to me, well, what did you find, Niamh, from all of that research? I said, I just found one thing, and it's so important, I finished it. So the main finding from my doctoral dissertation was I finished it. So again, I focused on finishing. I made certain that I didn't hit a wall. And the main way I made sure I didn't hit a wall was to inch forward every day with tiny, tiny little steps every day. Because I felt that if every single day I had a tiny little step, that inevitably I would end up finishing.
Niamh, hello, it's me again. Would you mind answering a few questions for me? There's a
That'd
few
be great.
questions coming in from the attendees in the Q&A box. So the first one we've got, I've just started my PhD a couple of months back. At this stage, I'm overwhelmed by the amount of information that is out there. Do you have any tips on how to start the PhD research, especially in the first 6 months?
What I would suggest is that in relation to your topic, that you restrict yourself, we'll say, to something like the top 50 papers in the top journals in the area of your topic.
Niamh, how do you find those 50 papers?
Well, Google Scholar. So, you know.
Google Scholar? Do you ask your supervisor for advice? What other things would you recommend?
You certainly wouldn't ask your supervisor for advice. Or if one of my students asked me for that advice, I would say to them, that's your job. You're the researcher. You need to work this out yourself. So you have to train yourself to not be overwhelmed and to find your little niche in the literature. So I suppose the first thing you have to do is you have to identify the top journals in your field. And nowadays there are all kinds of different journal ranking systems, which are a proxy. They're flawed, but they're a proxy to article quality. So you need to identify the top journals in your field. And then in your topic area, you need to identify the top papers. So I'd go into Google Scholar and I would do it in 2 different ways. I would look at the most highly cited papers on the topic. And then secondly, I would look, for example, I'd time limit my search, we'd say to 2019, so that I'm seeing what's coming out of the top journals in my topic. And papers published in 2019 will be citing all of the relevant prior literature. So a good 2019 paper, which won't have been much cited, will be a neat way of beginning to get a handle on the prior literature. So that's how I would approach that task.
Great. Do you want to take another question now?
Yep.
This is an interesting one. Any advice for new PhD students who have almost zero abilities for research?
Well, I mean, I started my PhD with the phrase zero ability I wouldn't use. I had zero experience of research, and that is an exaggeration. The point of a PhD is that you are being trained to be a researcher. So starting out without much experience of research is not unusual. And I think that you have to, use what ability and what skills you have to feed into your research. Another rule of the game is play to your strengths. So what are you good at? I'm good at languages, but that might suggest where you might position yourself in the field of research, taking advantage of that strength. A former PhD student of mine and now a co-author, she did her undergraduate degree in linguistics. And so all of her work, when I started supervising, I said to her, don't go into area A or area B. You've got to go into an area that uses your experience of communication and use your expertise in communication to feed in to your PhD, which was in accounting. So I encouraged her to play to her strengths. And of course, she was able to find brilliant ideas from communication and then bring it into a different field. Having no experience of research to start with isn't unusual, but you do have expertise, and you can use that expertise to feed into your research.
All right, shall we just do one more question before we move on with your next rule?
Right.
Throughout the PhD, you have to read a lot. What kind of systems do you use to keep track of your reading, e.g. EndNote?
Well, when I did my PhD, EndNote didn't exist. But what I did, and I remember at the time thinking I was taking a hammer to crack a nut, but actually, as it turns out, it was a very good thing to do. And what I did was I took a selection of papers, like the 50 papers that I referred to earlier, and I did summaries of them using a template of headings under which I summarized each article. And how that worked out, I did that for about 3 months. And again, every day I would leave the office and I would have summarized 1 or 2 articles. And again, I would have felt a sense that I was making progress in my tiny little step. I had in a tiny little step summarized 1 paper, and then a second step summarized a second paper. But I did that for about 3 months. And at the end of that, then in a week, I pulled together my literature review using those article summaries. And now with my own PhD students, when somebody approaches me to do a PhD, the first thing I get them to do is I ask them, what's the topic? They tell me the topic. I then give them 10 papers, 10 seminal papers in that topic area. And their very first task is summarize those 10 papers. And again, I'll just say that the first bit of advice I got, absolutely the worst possible advice. And in fact, it knocked me back 12 years. And the first bit of advice from a professor was, go into the library and read. After 6 weeks reading in the library, I came out tearing my hair out. And 12 years later, I got going again. And instead of reading in the library, I read a little bit. I wrote a little bit. I read another little bit. I wrote another little bit. And then I began to make progress because reading had no structure. So read a little bit, write a little bit, read and write all the time. And you're all the time, because you're writing a little bit, moving forward. And so I didn't read a lot. I read a little, and then I wrote a little, and continued to repeat that. And again, I was inching forward with tiny little steps.
Great. So how do you manage your references now? Do you use EndNote Library or Zotero or?
Well, I'm still a little bit old-fashioned, so I don't.
Yeah. What do you recommend your students do? Do you give them any advice?
No, because again, my students are the lead researcher and they have to do what they see fit. So some of my students use EndNote, others don't. But Google Scholar again is fantastic. You can go in and you can click on Google Scholar and get a reference quite quickly. Just in relation to EndNote, one thing that I find dreadful about EndNote is that if you make a mistake inputting into EndNote, that mistake will repeat and repeat and repeat. So if you're using EndNote, please make certain that every single tiny detail in EndNote is absolutely accurate.
Great. All right. Well, I will be quiet now and let you get on with your rules.
Very good. I'm now jumping on to rule number 24, and I mentioned this before. A doctoral dissertation is not Einstein's theory. I cite Mullins and Kiley, who say, you don't have to get a Nobel Prize out of a doctoral dissertation. It is merely a large project. And in my discipline, and this does vary from discipline to discipline, but in my discipline, a doctoral dissertation is expected to make 3 substantial contributions to the prior literature. Not Einstein's theory, not a Nobel Prize, just 3 substantial contributions to the prior literature. I know because I presented the rules of the game to a group of science PhD students, and I got the impression from them that in science, 1 substantial contribution is okay for a doctoral dissertation. Jumping on, Mel, to another rule number 40, and again, it reflects the fact that the doctoral dissertation is the student's responsibility, and because the student is the lead and the student is responsible, it is also the student's responsibility to organize regular meetings with the supervisor. And what do I mean by regular? In my opinion, regular would be, you know, maybe every month or 2 months. Would, in my opinion, be sufficient regularity. But again, this probably relates to discipline. I had a doctoral student who was absolutely brilliant at this. She just graduated recently, but the first thing she did was she would get dates into the diary for maybe the next 6 months. The second thing she was brilliant at was we always met the same time, 8:15 on a Friday morning. The third thing she did was before every meeting, with a good bit of time, she would send me some written work. And finally, when we had the meeting, she would have a printed page with a list of questions that she wanted to ask me. So between each meeting, she was clocking up on her list all the things she wanted to clarify with me. And that meant that the meetings were very, very productive from her point of view, and extremely satisfying from my point of view that she was taking such care in making certain that the meetings were going to be productive. So she managed that process, I thought very well. But she knew that it was her responsibility to organize the meetings and not the other way around. Next one, I had an absolutely brilliant supervisor who coincidentally, Mel, I was telling you earlier, I'm meeting for dinner this evening and I'm really looking forward to it. His name was Professor Sidney J. Gray, and he's at the University of Sydney, and in my field is absolutely a stellar researcher. But I used to play tennis with Sid Gray, metaphorically speaking. And what I mean by that is that if Sid said to me to do something, if Sid put a ball in my court, my burning objective was to get the ball out of my court and back into Sid's court. And he gave me a very good bit of advice at the very beginning. I was struggling to find a topic, and he steered me away from my first idea, which I now realize was a completely bad idea. So he did a great job in steering me away from that. And he then, luckily, had his second idea in the back of my head, which I mentioned, and he was more enthusiastic about that. But he then said to me, write 10 proposals. And that was superb advice. And again, he put a ball in my court, write 10 proposals. And my burning objective was to write 10 proposals as quick as I could, decently, you know, not just quality and speed, to write 10 good proposals and get them back to him, playing tennis with my supervisor. And it was a very good exercise because the 10 proposals were in a very narrow topic area, but there were 10 different ideas. And at the end of it, it meant that I had read the literature with an objective in mind, which was writing the 10 proposals. I was writing, because I had to write 10 proposals. And it was clear at the end of the exercise that one of them was the standout, strongest one. And that was the idea that I went with for my PhD. But I was playing tennis with my supervisor. Sid had put a ball in my court and I was getting back to him as quick as I could and as well done as I could. So my next rule, Mel, is coming on to the really challenging part of doctoral studies, and that is the writing part of it. So this rule relates to writing the dissertation. And where this rule comes from is that I had a colleague in UCD, in my university, who said to me that when he started his dissertation, he spent 6 weeks writing the table of contents. I thought that was a brilliant idea. But I didn't take 6 weeks to do it. I did it in a day. And then for the remaining 3 years of my doctoral studies, I refined it and refined it and refined it. Because I knew that the structure of the dissertation was absolutely critical to it being clear. So, and I have a metaphor to describe the importance of the table of contents. So if you're doing a jigsaw, where do you start the jigsaw? You start it with the 4 corners and then the flat pieces. And you then have this space in the middle. And so that is the table of contents. It's setting out the beginning, the middle, and the end of the dissertation. And then you have to, just like doing a jigsaw, you have to populate the bit in the middle. And another metaphor I use to describe the table of contents is, if you're driving from Dublin to Donegal and the roads in Ireland are pretty windy and all the rest, you have to have a map in your hand. If you're doing a large project like a doctoral dissertation, you have to have a map. You have to know the beginning, the middle, the end of it, and that is the table of contents. That's your route map, which over the period of your study is getting more and more deep and refined, etc. So I would be changing the table of contents all the time. And now at this stage, when I'm writing a paper, I always have a table of contents for the paper, watching the structure of it, making sure that the beginning, the middle, and the end is clear. So the table of contents is something I put an awful lot of work into. And when I review papers for a journal, if the table of contents, if the structure of the paper isn't good, I'm beginning to get a bad feeling about the paper, that it's not going to get a revise and resubmit or an accept decision. So having put so much work into my own table of contents, I then decided not to make life difficult for my students in University College Dublin being Master of Accounting students doing minor dissertations, and then my PhD students. So I wrote a little book for my Master of Accounting students, and I have a template table of contents, a generic table of contents in this little book, which I give to all of my students. So again, on the first day, I give them Niamh's generic table of contents. And of course, my template, as soon as they start to populate it, stops looking like Niamh's generic table of contents and begins to look like their customized table of contents for their own doctoral dissertations. My generic table of contents reflects the fact that I started out doing a quantitative dissertation, and I'm now much more of a qualitative researcher, so it may require a little bit of adaptation, but at least it's a start. At least you don't have to reinvent the wheel yourself. Another approach to that exercise might be to have a look at other doctoral dissertations to see what their table of contents looks like. And that little book, which is out of print now, is available through my university's repository. So you can find my generic table of contents. You can start with it, because your table of contents will end up being completely different, but at least you have something to start with. So continuing on, and again, sticking with the writing part of things, you have to have some kind of master document. And when I talk about master document, I don't necessarily mean a single document. You may have a master set of files. But I sometimes talk to doctoral students and they leave me with the impression that their work looks a little bit more like pellets flying out of a shotgun than like a coherent body of work. And the thing about research is it has to be all singing, all dancing, hand in glove integrated. So having pellets out of the shotgun flying all over the place is not consistent with that objective. So, you know, you have to have the body of work all together, moving it all forward at the same time together, making certain that it is internally consistent and coherent. So if you change something, for example, in chapter 3, you need to make sure to go back to chapter 1 and make sure that chapter 1 moves forward consistently with the change that you've made in chapter 3. And how you actually organize that in your computer is a matter for yourselves, but you do need to think about the fact that you're moving a large project forward and you need to have the building blocks of that large project all together, and you need to move those building blocks forward all together so that you have a coherent research project. Sticking, Mel, with the writing, and again, I've mentioned this, my struggle with after 6 weeks reading in the library with no structure or anything like that. So instead of reading in the library, I now read a tiny bit, write a bit. You know, so I might read a paper, and when I say read a paper, I now know how to read a paper, so I know where to find things in a paper, and that's one of the things that all that reading of papers is training you to read an academic article so that you can find things quickly, so that nowadays I might look at an article, find the one key sentence, and then write a sentence reflecting that one key sentence in my own work. So reading a little bit, writing a little bit, to me that dynamic is more successful than read, because you have nothing to show for it at the end of the day if all you're doing is read. And that's why another rule number 69, is to write almost every day. So read a bit, write a bit, and do it as much as you can on a daily basis. So Mel, I just have one more rule left, and I'm wondering, have you any more questions for me before I get to the final rule?
Oh, I do actually. There's a few here. So next we've got, where would you recommend to start writing the dissertation when in the first year of the PhD?
Well, first of all, I've recommended that you could start with my generic table of contents.
Yeah. And I think Nicole shared that one for everyone listening. She shared the thesis guide in the chat. So there's a link to that. As Niamh said, it's in the University College Dublin repository, but Nicole has shared the link in chat, so you'll be able to get it from there.
Mm-hmm. And the next thing that I would suggest after the table of contents, so with your table of contents, which is just a very crude skeleton, which as you read more and learn more, you can deepen, but you have to start somewhere. And after the table of contents, the next thing I would do is I would write an abstract. Now, I presume a student at the beginning has already written a research proposal. Maybe write an abstract which would reflect what's in the research proposal. And you could take Emerald, for example, the publisher, have a structured abstract format. And if you use a structured abstract format and then write a sentence or two under each of the headings for your structured abstract, that might be a second step. And then read an article, put in a sentence or two, from reading that article into your dissertation. And just in relation to putting a sentence or two into a dissertation, having read an article, it is better not to quote from other people's work. It's better to paraphrase. Because if your dissertation is full of quotes from other people's work, then it's not your work. So paraphrasing other people's work. So you've read a sentence or two in somebody else's paper, and then write a sentence in your dissertation, and write that sentence by paraphrasing what has been said in the paper that you've just written. And so doing your table of contents, doing your abstract, and then start reading and writing a little sentence here, a little sentence there. And if you keep doing that every day, eventually you will end up with X hundred pages, which is what you need for a doctoral dissertation.
Sound advice, sound advice. Okay, so next, what's the best way to keep on top of your field over time? Are there programs or apps that you set up to send updates when there's new papers?
I don't do that myself.
Mm-hmm.
I know that some of my doctorate students do it. So they are watching the literature and they are getting the alerts from the journal. Yeah, and in a way, it's a bit of a chicken and egg kind of situation. If you keep watching what's coming down the tracks, that's not necessarily good for progress forward. So, you know, if I was doing it, my number one objective would be to get to the end, and possibly maybe at that stage to just do a final search on Google Scholar on the very latest things that are coming out. But if you're all the time looking for the various latest things, I kind of wonder, would that distract you from your ultimate objective, which is to finish your PhD?
Fair enough, yeah. Do you ever get questions, you know, with nervous students, worried that someone else is doing their research and that theirs will no longer, you know, that they'll be trumped and their, you know, research will no longer be an original contribution?
I have one student who's in an area where I would say she feels a complete gun to her head on that front. Because she can see working papers going up on SSRN and such like, where people are researching what she's doing. And on, you know, at the end of the day, she's committed to her topic, so she just has to keep going, and she has to, I think she has got, you know, I think she, it would be very unlucky if somebody else was doing exactly what she's doing, although other people are in her narrow enough topic area.
Right.
So I think that's always a concern. But once you commit to your topic, you have to go for it. Another rule of the game is avoid the flounder factor. And if you're floundering around saying, oh, I shouldn't do that topic because other people are in the area, I'll move to a different topic area, that's floundering, that's not moving forward. So I think once you pick your topic area, you've got to move it forward, and you've got to try and move it forward in a space that you hope other people aren't going to fill.
Great, yep. All right, so the questions are still coming in thick and fast here. Hi, thanks so much for the webinar. I'm a family man and I'm having trouble marking off boundaries between family time and writing/research time. Do you have any suggestions?
Well, the first thing I would say is you are exceptionally lucky to be a family man. You have riches beyond belief in terms of your family, and that should always come first. And I'll just share a personal confession on that front, that in the middle of my PhD, I realized that my biological clock was running out faster than my PhD clock. So in the middle of it, I had my PhD baby, otherwise known as my youngest son. I have 3 sons, and thank God I wasn't so stupid as to push my research and my career ahead of my family. And I suppose my advice goes back to the rule about focusing. So again, I stopped doing things that were nice to have and started focusing only on must-haves. So we'd say domestic life mightn't have been quite as in good shape as I got more and more into my research as it used to be. So I stopped kind of stressing out about the house and stuff like that. It's perfectly okay. But I lost my instinct to be house proud and to be prinking and preening around domestic issues. And I kind of was much more focused on cutting to the chase. I hope, not shortchanging my family, not shortchanging my colleague in my university, but stopping being a doormat for things that I didn't have to be a doormat for. Stopped time wasting on things that weren't must-haves. But everybody has to work it out for themselves. And, I would say most PhD students do have family commitments, which of course does add to the pressure. On the other hand, they're so lucky to have family commitments. And by the way, I should add that I've had a number of my PhD students have had babies in the middle of their PhD. I remember one coming into my office and saying, "Oh, Niamh, you'll kill me." I wouldn't kill her. I was delighted for her. And she finished her PhD and she had her baby. So how good is that?
Wonderful. Yeah. Okay. Another question. Do you have any particular strategies for maintaining focus and drive throughout such a long period of time?
Well, I have to say that it is in a way in my character. So I'm a very resilient, dogged, persistent person. The dog with the bone, the bowling skittle, back up again. And that's kind of hardwired into my character. And it stands me well even now, where if I get a paper rejected from a journal, I'm determined to get it published in another journal. And so I do think that research and doctoral research is better suited to some personality types than to other personality types. When I started my doctoral studies, I was only doing it, I thought at the time, to get the union card. Because you need a PhD if you're going to have an academic career. And I made an unexpected discovery, which is I absolutely, completely caught the bug. I absolutely love research, and I haven't kind of looked back ever since. But it certainly isn't for everybody. I mean, what it entails in my field is it entails thousands of hours in what I like to call my padded cell, otherwise known as my office. So I'm comfortable, with my own company. I'm comfortable working on my own and maybe with one or two co-authors. But if you're a really outgoing, gregarious, vivacious type person, you may not actually have a personality that particularly suits the kind of solitude and loneliness in some respects of doctoral research and research subsequently. That's kind of, I just keep going because that's in my nature to keep going.
Okay. So the next question is, I lose confidence sometimes when I lose track of exactly what I'm looking for. Any advice? I'm only 5 months into my PhD.
Well, first of all, do you know the gender of the person who asked that question?
I would suspect male.
Oh, interesting. This shows my subconscious bias. Again, the two things that kept me confident at the time was thousands of other people had done it. So if they could do it, I could do it. And secondly, if I just inched forward every single day, I would get to the end. So both those ideas in my head gave me a sense of confidence that I actually would be able to finish it. But I think, if you're having a down day and you're feeling a bit down and your confidence is low, that's the time to talk to somebody. Another rule of the game is to find a study buddy, you know, to find somebody else maybe doing a PhD, so that on your down day, your study buddy can boost you up. And then when your study buddy is down, it can happen in reverse. Another source of confidence is possibly your supervisor. I don't know whether if you're just 5 months into it, whether you would have a supervisor at this stage. But again, I kind of think talk to other people, and hopefully that will give you a little bit more confidence.
Okay. My problem is writing a critical paper. What's the best way, in your opinion, to improve my academic writing?
Well, there is material out there on words like, you know, the anatomy of a paper. So if I'm writing a paper, for example, for a journal, I will look at exemplar papers in that journal to work out the anatomy of the paper, and based on that anatomy, because all journals have different styles and a different ethos, and based on the anatomy of a selection of papers in that journal, it then feeds into informing me as to the anatomy of my own paper. I've spoken to people, and one researcher, extremely well published researcher, I mean, he does things like, he will go into the journal he's targeting, and he's always targeting the top journals. He will look and see, for example, how many sentences are in that abstract, or how many words are in the abstract. His abstract is going to be the same. What does the top paper start with? What do they say in the first sentence? What do they say in the second sentence? What do they say in the third sentence? And then, you know, he uses that to inform how he designs his own paper. So the way to learn how to write a critical paper is to look at others before you who have written good critical papers, and to work out what it is that makes their paper good, and then to try and copy them. And I'm not saying plagiarize, I'm saying copy them. You know, where do they put their contribution paragraph? How do they express the object of the paper? Things like that. And then take that style and maybe try and apply it to your own topic.
Great. This person would like to know if you've got any advice relating to a PhD by publication. I've published one paper, submitted another, am about to submit my third of 5 or 6. Do you have any advice on the publication process, particularly in regards to suggesting reviewers and avoiding politics with blind reviewers? I'm in quite a niche area where there are very few that know much detail about my topic.
Okay, well, there are, broadly speaking, 2 types of dissertation. There's the magnum opus, or there's what I call the 3-paper model, which you're talking about, PhD by publication. I'd call that the 3-paper model. And in fact, a good few of my students are adopting a 3-paper model. And I learned something, I wish I had known it a bit earlier, but in one case, we have a paper under review. And again, in my field, the norm would be that the student and the supervisor are the co-authors when it comes to publication. And that doesn't apply across all disciplines. But once I become a co-author on a paper, because I would never take a free ride ever, I start writing the paper with the student. And that is an ethical challenge from the point of view that a PhD should be the student's own work. And only recently I found out from a colleague in the University of Lancaster in the UK, the Lancaster model. And how they handle that in Lancaster is they take the paper written solely by the student, and that's the version that goes into the PhD. And then the subsequent version, which is where the supervisor has co-authored with the student, and that's the version under review, that doesn't go into the PhD. Now, in relation to the second part of that question, which is picking reviewers and all the rest, in my field, we tend not to engage in that kind of process. So when I submit my papers to a journal, I don't recommend the reviewers. The reviewers are selected by the editors and associate editors. So I'm a little bit out of my depth in advising about the reviewer selection process.
All right. Well, we're 7 or 8 minutes over time, so I think we should wrap that up now. So thanks everyone for attending, and thank you so much, Niamh, for a inspiring presentation. To everyone attending, we will send out, oh, I've forgotten your last rule, Niamh, sorry.
The most important rule of all. It's so important that I repeat it.
Okay, go, please, sorry.
It is repeated, enjoy your doctoral studies. And what I think would be an exercise for people on the webinar would be to write down your 3 rules of the game and then see, are they in Niamh's 2 papers? You know, everybody has their own little pet rules of the game. So what are your pet rules of the game?
Fabulous. Thanks, everyone. I will send out a link to the recording and a link to all the resources we've shared today. Thanks for all the questions and for being such an interactive audience. We really appreciate it. Thanks so much. Bye.